Michigan voters speak out and off-the-record reports on what you said during the special correspondence edition of the election last Tuesday, with Jonathan Osting, Clara Hendrickson, Lauren Gibbons, and Simon Schuster on the OTR panel. So sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C. Post-election, lots to talk about. Bernie Porn, our pollster, has this to say about that.
Both candidates have problems.
Both candidates for president have a vote problem in Michigan. Voters who either voted uncommitted in Mr. Biden's case or voted for Nikki Haley, the Republican, in Mr. Trump's case. She got almost 27% of the vote, mostly in the urban suburban areas, and some of those voters were Democrats crossing over. For example, Washtenaw County, Haley got 44%. Ingham, 35%, Kent, 34%, 33% in Oakland, and in the state's most conservative county, Ottawa, 33%.
And those are counties that Trump will need in a general election. And I think that her performance would suggest that there is some weakness there in terms of Republicans, not as strong as one would think. And 68% for Trump, that's not nearly what I expected him to get.
In his victory statement, Mr. Trump ignored Ms. Haley. Earlier, he called her, quote, a joke. So, is the loss of votes for Mr. Trump a major problem? Mr. Porn says he is currently winning battleground states without them.
He's trying to appeal to the MAGA base, and I think that that's what they are planning on winning the election with.
Meanwhile, Mr. Biden lost his 100,000 votes, or 13%, among Arab American and Muslim voters who want him to end the war in Gaza. Mr. Porn contends this is a bigger problem for Mr. Biden than the one Mr. Trump confronts. However,
but at 13%, it's not quite as bad.
It's bad, but it's not a deal closer.
No.
But he quickly adds a whole bunch of Democrats could abandon the president if there is no permanent ceasefire.
If not, that could be a problem among those 74% of Democrats who want a ceasefire.
Just before the election, Mr. Biden hinted that a temporary ceasefire could come as early as next week. But if so, would that appease these protesters who made a statement yesterday at the polls? Yeah, that's a big question. All right, so here's a question. Mr. Porn thinks that of the two gentlemen that have that 100,000 vote problem, Mr. Biden is in deeper trouble. Is he right or wrong?
I don't know. I mean, Biden's circumstances can change depending on the war and what happens over the next several months. The problem for Trump is somewhat seemingly intractable. I mean, these are the same voters, especially Kent County, Oakland County, that he struggled to win over or lost, really. They abandoned him in 2020. So, that is a circumstance that maybe is baked in and won't change. So, theoretically, that could be a bigger issue for Trump. That said, 27% for Nikki Haley, let's put that in perspective. She's a serious candidate. It's not a big number. Trump won pretty handily still in Michigan.
If I'm Biden and I see over 100,000 votes, what number does that remind me of? My over 154,000 vote margin in 2020. So
in Michigan.
In Michigan, it's a lot of voters. It's significant. And of the folks that I've spoken to who voted uncommitted, they're not sure how they're going to vote in a likely Trump-Biden rematch if Biden does not change course on the war.
All right, that's 1-1.
I think where Biden is probably looking is he going to be able to get those people to turn out and vote for him? Certainly this was a protest statement, but, some of those people may decide that his stance hasn't changed enough for them to even show up on November. So I think that could be a potential bigger issue for him if he's not garnering the support. Obviously, Trump has the MAGA base and they'll show up, and then Republicans, it kind of remains to be seen. I think it's still the jury's still out.
Well, of the two groups, Mr. Biden has a better shot at getting his people back than Mr. Trump has getting those people back. Do we agree on that?
Oh, not to play the curmudgeon here, but I think we're making two assumptions about these 100,000 votes. One is that these 100,000 votes were made solely because of the Israel-Hamas war, and not just because he's a deeply unpopular president that's a lot of people consider too old to be running. The second is that if he were to make this policy change for an immediate ceasefire, that these people would then come back on board and turn out for him in November. I don't know if we have substantive data to necessarily say that either of those things are going to happen. On Trump's side, I think that, Nikki Haley, when I went to her rally earlier this week, that almost all the attendees that I talked to said that they'd be voting for Biden instead of Trump, come November if Nikki's not in the race. And so I think when you look at these factors combined, there's not really a clear picture of how these supporters may or may not peel away from the eventual nominees.
Well, Mr. Porn asserted in that piece that Mr. Trump can win with the Make America Great coalition. Doesn't he need some independent voters, which he's getting, by the way?
Yeah, he absolutely does. I mean, he lost relying on the MAGA base in 2020. So, theoretically, 154,000 votes, he could win if there's super low turnout on the Democratic side for Joe Biden.
Which there was in his primary.
Sure, maybe then the MAGA base would be enough. But, if the circumstances are similar as they were in 2020, he's going to need to win back some of those exact same voters that he did not win back in this primary.
What did you make of the showing of Ms. Haley?
Well, she made a sort of last-minute appearance in Michigan. It's not like she's been campaigning heavily in this state. And so it was a pretty strong showing given that context. Clearly Trump has a Michigan problem, and her name is Nikki Haley.
I think when you look at both sides, there's certainly a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? I guess not very much excitement on either side.
Enthusiasm.
Yes, enthusiasm is it. Yes. So when you're looking at both Democrats and Republicans, seeing a rematch is not necessarily what a lot of people in either party wanted. I think a lot of people wanted different choices, different options. And by the time both candidates got to Michigan, it was pretty clear, with the exception of Nikki Haley, that for the most part, those were the options they were going to get. So I would anticipate that, perhaps by November things might change a little bit, but certainly, yeah, it's not just Palestine, it's not just Trump's ongoing legal issues. It's just people are a little bored, I think.
Yeah, I think when you talk to key Biden surrogates like Governor Gretchen Whitmer, how she's trying to cast this is that, as we move on from this primary towards November, she's essentially saying that voters are going to look to other issues, this full portfolio of policy options in which she can cast Trump as sort of an existential threat on issues like climate change and democracy. And so
abortion.
Yes, abortion in particular, that's sort of the driving issue that she's tried to push, at least with her super PAC. And so I think as you move towards November, the question is to the extent to which the incumbent president can sort of take his base and say, look at all this other stuff that matters, and look at how important this election is going to be on these other issues. At the same time, I think even more so than 2020, we're going to see two candidates that are really just trying to pump up the unfavorables of their opponents. It's going to get a lot nastier, I think.
Who do you hate the most? If you're the Speaker of the House and you're looking at the Biden campaign, are you thinking, this is going to keep me awake at night?
Well, Joe Tate has said he's not concerned at all about...
Yeah, that's what he says.
But, we know that the top of the ticket can either lift up or drag down ballot races. And with every state house seat up for re-election in a closely contested state, and potentially with even tighter maps that skew slightly more Republican that could be adopted by the court soon, it's a tight road for re-election for Democrats.
Yeah, everything Clara said is true. I think Democrats were already looking at a potentially difficult bid to keep the state house. If Biden continues to be wildly unpopular, that's really going to complicate things. And I will say the Biden campaign, they're in Michigan pretty actively right now. They've got a lot of money.
Ed Duggan is doing his work.
Sure,
okay.
And surrogates are everywhere. They had a larger presence in the state than the Trump campaign and might, pump up some numbers in some parts of the state. But we'll see. It's going to be a tough year potentially for Democrats. That said, we've said that before.
Yeah.
I think that's where turnout is going to be key, right? That is where it really will matter, and certainly the Biden surrogates and the governor and many others are making the case. Yes, things at the federal level could change how Michigan operates quite a bit, especially after having a couple of years of the Democratic majority, particularly on the abortion issue, as we mentioned. But in terms of actual impact on Michigan residents, changing the House would make a huge difference in what sorts of policies are getting passed, if any get passed at all. So I think that that's one of the areas that the Democrats will probably start to have to hit. If you want to keep this majority, you got to come out and vote.
I think one of the things that you hear as an often refrain from the retiring Senator Debbie Stabenow is that Democrats struggle to sort of tell the story of their policy accomplishments. And I think one of the biggest advantages that Democrats are going to face heading into this general election season is that they have a lot more financial resources right now than the Trump campaign to do that. And as a result, if Democrats at the state level can also get their fundraising game together and carry the advantage that they had in the 2022 election forward, they're going to have a lot more they might be able to sort of negate a little bit of those coattail effects and also have a lot more power in sort of trying to tout the policy accomplishments of Biden's first term. But that remains to be seen.
I'd like to get your reaction. The speaker was on the program last week, and there are some people in this town who believe the electric vehicle issue is a liability for the Democrats. He was very sanguine about that. He just blew it off and said, we're going to run on our record. Does he do that? And maybe he ought to reassess?
What's the electric vehicle issue?
Well, the EV issue is Donald Trump is making hay and telling UAW workers, if you vote for Joe Biden, you're going to lose your job. Next question.
Yeah, I think the challenge with that is that you have the UAW that basically premise its entire strike on making the EV transition a just one and winning record contracts. So Trump is sort of up against those headwinds of workers actually in this industry getting gains in wages and benefits as the auto industry is changing.
But that is yet to be seen as to whether that's going to work. And Mr. Trump will continue to, first of all, he'll ignore that. Mm-hmm. Okay, just hit on the fact that jobs are at stake here.
Right. I think that's definitely a possibility, and certainly we saw that the last time the former president was here. But I also think you're seeing at the local and state level, they're making the other energy policies passed by legislative Democrats a big issue in terms of local control over whether renewable energies are there, higher energy costs potentially if some of these things don't work out. I think that's a message that we're going to see pretty frequently from Republicans up and down the ticket.
I think the biggest challenge that Republicans have in sort of pushing this issue, and one that's an advantage for Democrats, is that these are structural changes, things that are going to fundamentally alter our economy if they're allowed to move forward as they have been. And so as a result, you're not going to see sort of the negative changes. When you look at the way that electric vehicles are assembled, because this transition isn't happening nearly as quickly as, say, the Biden administration or even Governor Whitmer would like, we're not seeing those negative effects front and center as we might and had the former president speaking about, so that it sort of becomes more theoretical doomsaying, at least in the minds of auto workers and voters.
It is not going to come to fruition between now and November. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, no, but it doesn't need to. I mean, Trump has been a master of scaring people into believing his points. And all he needs to do is keep saying it. He thinks, anyways, he thinks it's going to be a waiting issue. I think two things kind of undermine that. One is that the UAW did secure contracts, and Biden at least showed some very public support for that. And two, I think Trump is making a very strategic mistake attacking Sean Fain as much as he did. I mean, I think Sean Fain might be one of the most popular people in the state right now with blue-collar workers. So, I don't think he's doing himself any favors with that.
But if it's popularity of Mr. Fain versus my pocketbook and food on my table, I know who wins.
Well, let's not forget that Trump's main message of economic grievance when he first ran was about something that had already happened. He was talking about trade deals that were done in the past, deindustrialization that already hit communities, and now he's trying to use this sort of specter of job losses in the future. So it's a key distinction between the sort of economic message he's running on this time.
Yeah, his message was essentially enjoy your jobs now because you won't have them in 3 years. Well, they have them now, and that's something that he does have to contend with.
All right, so what's new in the U.S. Senate race vis-a-vis the Republican side?
Yeah, so of course, Sandy Pence earlier this week picked up a significant endorsement from Vivek Ramaswamy, who's
Why is that significant?
Well, I think
this guy's a loser.
Right. And so, I mean, so much of this primary race is about consolidating the Trumpian base and coalescing them around a candidate. I think Mike Rogers has been relatively successful in that up until this point. But for a certain sort of doctrinaire, ideologue wing of the MAGA movement, Vivek is really important because he sort of casts himself his entire presidential campaign as him being sort of the torchbearer that, you know, he's a younger incarnation, more articulate incarnation of Donald Trump.
Do endorsements today in this current social media climate mean as much as they did 20 or 30 years ago?
I don't think so in a primary. I think, I don't think Vivek's endorsement is going to make a huge difference in the primary. That said, Sandy Penzler is very clearly trying to run in the Trump lane, and if he gets Vivek, well, maybe Trump will follow, right? I think that's what Sandy Penzler is clearly hoping for. The other significant development this week is that Justin Amash formally got into the GOP race. So now you've got a number of folks who are running in the somewhat anti-Trump with Amash and Peter Meijer a little bit, although he's come around perhaps
that
on
lane
Trump.
is getting crowded.
Mike Rogers is trying not to be the anti-Trump candidate, but, is going for moderate voters more. And Penzler sees a very clear lane to take that Trump vote, especially with James Craig getting out.
All right, go ahead.
I would just argue that Amash's introduction into the race is an enormous gift for both Mike Rogers and Sandy Penzler, because as you were saying, Jonathan, they're going for this Trump lane and to consolidate that vote. And so because of Amash's, sort of libertarian lean, his constitutional conservative bent, that allows him to sort of attack Kent County voters, folks who are more traditionally conservative. And then that means because Rogers and Penzler aren't also fighting over that territory, that they're free to sort of go even deeper, double down on seeking Trump's nomination.
The Rogers people were hyping a poll that they commissioned from a group out of Washington, D.C. Let's take a look at that story and what that means. The Rogers campaign itself did not pay for this poll, but a super PAC supporting him did. And the pollster contends Mr. Rogers is leading his fellow Republicans, Peter Meijer and Sandy Penzler, 32 to 12 to 4. But that also means that just over half of the Republican primary voters in this poll had no idea whom they would support. The pollster reports on how folks feel about Mr. Rogers.
In total, 63% of people say they know Mike Rogers. Among that, 29% have a favorable view towards him, 23% have no real opinion about him, and 10% are unfavorable.
In comparison, 56% have heard of candidate Meijer and 34% recognize candidate Penzler. But the truly big X factor in this primary is Donald Trump. So far, no endorsement from him.
I don't think his endorsement means somebody wins or somebody loses.
But he concedes if Mr. Trump does pick somebody, it will obviously help, which is why he explains everybody is currying favor to get it. And on that front, he takes a shot at Peter Meijer for voting to impeach the president. But it was pointed out that Mr. Rogers has changed his rhetoric, too.
Isn't it true your candidate flip-flopped too, didn't he?
Mike didn't vote for impeachment.
That wasn't my question. He had a previous position where he was critical of Trump, and now he's on board.
Yeah, but I think that's the answer. And that's why when you look at this poll...
John, I want Mike's answer because he's having trouble answering.
No, I mean, I don't have trouble answering. I think that all the candidates have made statements, both in support and at times critical of the president. But I think it's much more difficult to overcome an impeachment vote.
The Meijer campaign spokesperson argues a poll from a PAC is not news. And Mr. Meijer is getting, quote, a tremendous response and is the only candidate who can win. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for candidate Penzler calls Mr. Rogers, quote, a never-Trumper, and notes that 2/3 of the primary vote is wide open. And Sandy Penzler, quote, has a great path to win. Voters will have the final say in this Republican primary to decide who is right. But that is still 6 months away. That piece underscores the power of television. Why am I saying that?
You could see the pregnant pause, not just read about it.
And you could feel it. You could feel it. I wanted to ask him afterwards, what were you thinking? Or were you? What'd you make of that piece?
I mean, I think that the most important thing is the low name ID that we have for all these candidates.
They don't know what anybody is.
And that's great for all of them because they've all flip-flopped on this Trump issue. That's undeniable.
Tabula rasa.
Right. And so either we're going to have a situation where all of them are attacking one another, saying you're all flip-flopping on your support for the former president, or you're going to have such a blistering amount of ads from the best-funded candidates that they essentially are able to get out in front of it. They're going to have to sort of pick between these two avenues, and I think that Mike Rogers is probably best positioned to really become the best-funded candidate in this race.
Yeah, I think to the point about whether the Trump endorsement matters, I think it does to a point, but there's certainly a way, especially with money and name recognition, to get around it if they do not get that endorsement.
Well, some would point out that Trump's endorsement record in Michigan has not exactly been exemplary.
No. I mean, and that was true across the country in the 2022 cycle. I mean, he endorsed candidates for all kinds of races, not just sort of the big ones, but this is a big one in Michigan. It's an open U.S. Senate seat. And even though candidates do have time and the lack of name recognition to sort of dance around the Trump issue, you can't escape a Trump impeachment vote, and that's going to be huge in a GOP primary. And the question will be for Republican voters, which impeachment did you find less offensive? The one that Amash voted for, the one that Meyer voted for?
Yeah, listen, Trump had a bad track record in Michigan with his endorsements, but that was in the general election. As far as the primary goes, I think it would be fairly influential.
Well, the pollster did eventually get around to the answer, which is the correct answer. It is tougher to defend an impeachment vote than just some comments that were, well, I didn't like what he did here or there, whatever. Ms. Karamo, tell us what's going on.
Whew, how much time do you have, Tim?
5 minutes and 17 seconds. Go.
Yeah, so a Kent County judge on Tuesday, Election Day, which is where Kristina Karamo spent her election day, he ruled that Kristina Karamo was properly removed as chair back on January 6, voiding any actions she's taken since then, and in a preliminary injunction, ordered her to stop calling herself or acting as the Michigan GOP chair, to prohibit her from accessing bank accounts, email accounts, social media accounts, all that stuff. Karamo appealed to the Michigan Court of Appeals, which took 39 minutes to reject her request for a stay, which would have allowed her to reassume, at least continue to call herself the chair ahead of these caucus conventions that are this weekend, where the state party is actually going to allocate most of its delegates to the National Nominating Convention. So it's arguably, therefore, more important than the primary that just took place on Tuesday.
I think it's really interesting to see what's happening now on Karamo's faction of the party, because for all intents and purposes, as we know so far, a lot could change in the next 24 hours. This Detroit caucus is still going to happen. People are still going to arrive in Detroit, but what we've seen from the Republican National Committee, what we've seen in court in terms of the legal weight, as Jonathan was, noting, nothing that happens there is necessarily going to matter.
How serious is this division now in the party? Is it as bad as it was a year ago? Is it getting better? What's the prognosis?
I mean, I would argue it's never been serious because it's not been an ideological disagreement. It's been personality fights and fights over power and control. I mean, the real stakes are the vote operation for the fall and fundraising. That's what's on the line.
Will the Karamo people stay home? Are they so upset that they have lost this thing that they'll bail on the party? What's left of it?
I think there's probably going to be at least a decent number of them who see the writing on the wall, see what has happened, and that they're not
the true believers.
Well, I'm sure that there are true believers who will, continue being activists. But I think there are people who were previously Karamo supporters who have seen the fundraising issues, who have seen, just kind of the bad press that it's gotten, with the physical fighting sometimes. Like, it hasn't been a great run for the GOP in terms of, actually getting the support they need to make a play in Michigan. Yep. So I think that's where you're going to see some people say, okay, you know what, fine. We'll participate in whatever this is.
Is this an inside baseball story?
Oh, completely. I think Claire hit the nail on the head that, for the Republican electorate, this doesn't matter one bit. And I think Lauren also made a really good point in that when it comes to what people are looking for, delegates and voters alike, in a leader for the Michigan Republican Party, they want someone who can build an organization infrastructure that's going to be focused on one thing, and that's winning elections. And so in terms of where the evidence is for the legacy of Christina Karamo as Michigan Republican Party chair, it's not looking very good for her in that regard. And I think that is a huge motivating factor for people within the party to sort of come around and say, well, we might have lost this war, but let's try to move on to what we really care about, which is universally among them getting former President Donald Trump reelected.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer has handed a political hot potato this week as the MSU board under investigation. The allegation is 2 members of the board. It was recommended to the governor that she remove them for their conduct from the board, and the governor took the hot potato, and what did she do with it?
So far, not much.
She left it in the oven.
She's putting the potato down for now. I think it's definitely an issue that a lot of people care about very deeply. But it's also removing trustees is quite a feat, and it's something that would be it's an election year. It's just a difficult story to deal with.
It was a wonderfully crafted statement that the executive office issued. They acknowledged the severity and the concern over what this report came up with. And then the governor directed the board to look at it thoroughly while we, quote, continue to monitor the situation.
What is there left to monitor? This is the university's investigation. It's now the ball in Gretchen Whitmer's court. I mean, I don't know necessarily what the incentive is to wade into this mess, but
she could have returned it to the attorney general. Here, take this up, Ms. Nessel. Tell me what's going on. She could have done that. Why are you laughing?
Because the ultimate authority, unless I'm misunderstanding, the ultimate authority for removing these chairs rests with the governor. And that means that if she wants to take action to it, then she touches the issue. This has been...
But she's got to do her due diligence. She's not going to wander into this thing just willy-nilly. She wants backup on what should be done.
Right, but for the entirety of the length that it's happening, she's then attached to all the drama and all the negative press, years and years of it, that has been attached to the board.
Which is why they're in a monitoring mode and not in an acting mode. Amen or yes?
Yeah, I mean, the investigation gave her a little out. It said it should be referred to the governor. And the governor said, well, it hasn't been referred to me yet.
All right, thank you. Great analysis, folks. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.